So let's go back into the book by Spufford. So I thought today that I would start by giving you a kind of short summary, the key ideas of the book. So if you go in page 3 of your handout, towards the end, it should be 2 or 3, you have key ideas of the book on the top. So the key ideas of the book, I thought I would choose one sentence and one idea for more or less all the chapters of this book. So the first one we talked a lot about is that it is called Unapologetic because, if you remember, it doesn't want to be a book of apologetic being the defense of faith, okay, using rational arguments, other rational scientific arguments for the existence of God. So there's been a whole tradition, especially since the 17th century, 16th, 17th century, to trying to find arguments for the existence of God. They, I think the broad evaluation is that they are a failure, but there is something to be said for that approach. Certainly, the argument of Spufford, nobody will believe in God just because of the arguments you give to them. Usually these arguments are more useful once you believe in God, once you're already, are established in your faith. It's good to see that faith is not irrational, doesn't go against reason. Obviously, you cannot prove the existence of God, but it is also wrong to say that reason and science disprove the existence of God, okay? So there is a point for that. But the main argument of the book, and one that makes this approach really, I think, interesting, at least for me, as I've told you repeatedly, has been one of the most stimulating books I've read in recent years, is that, faith and Christianity has been battered in all possible ways, especially over the past few centuries and over the past decades. The church has been discredited, science and has been assaulted, and philosophy have been criticizing Christianity, and yet Christianity still has a huge hold, still attracts people a lot. Why? What is the reason? Well, the reason is that it makes sense emotionally. So that's the main argument of the book. It makes sense emotionally in the sense that really in Christianity we recognize not only something that speaks to our deepest desires and needs, but also we find in Christianity, in the Bible in particular, the acknowledgement to all, the emotions, not just the noble ones, love, let's talk about love, etc., piety, etc., but also anger, also lust, even everything, okay? So just go and read the Song of Songs. We might do something next year about the Song of Songs. I'm very tempted to go there, or the Song of Solomon as it is called. Okay? So it makes sense emotionally. So the first point, faith begins in emotion and experience, not just intellectual assent. Okay? And there's a quotation from the book from page 19. It is the feelings that are primary. I assent to the ideas because I have the feelings. I don't have the feelings because I've assented to the ideas. Okay? And for a religion that is first of all about love, I think this makes a lot of sense. Then there's a lot. The author has a lot to say about guilt, sin, and failure. And this is one of the points where I told you I have some disagreement with the author of the book, because I'm less inclined to think that guilt is a positive or can have a positive influence in a life of faith or in emotional life in general. Okay, but there is something in the quotation that is here from page 42, number 2 of the handout. Taking the things people do wrong seriously is part of taking them seriously. Okay, and it is true. So we shouldn't kind of lull ourselves into this idealized version of humanity. Humanity is seriously flawed. You know, the evidence is all around us. Probably we shouldn't be as pessimistic as some people tend to be. There is a part of the Christian tradition, the Reformed so-called tradition, that speaks about total corruption of humanity. It says that humanity is totally corrupted. The Catholic tradition in broad sense, not just the Roman Catholics, but also the tradition represented by St. Thomas, is more nuanced about that. Would say that humanity is ill, okay, but not totally depraved, totally corrupt. And this creates kind of different spin on spirituality. But certainly, you know, it is a factor to take into account. Then there is I'm mentioning these things, these chapters or these ideas to you in case you have not read them yet. If there is a chapter I recommend you to read, is the chapter, I can't remember if it is the 3rd or the 4th, when the book talks about the problem of evil. I think it's one of the most, having spent with you like 8 weeks, 8 talks talking about the issue of suffering and evil, I think the chapter on suffering is one of the best summaries of the issue I've ever come across. Number 3, the Christian story doesn't solve suffering, but offers companionship and hope in the midst of it. God doesn't explain himself, he shares our pain. Okay? And there are a couple of quotations from page 14. A consolation you could trust would be one that acknowledged the difficult stuff and then found you grounds for hope in spite of it. Okay? So Christianity does not explain to us why there is evil in the world. Okay? The issue of original sin and the angels and the devil are more metaphors, parables, than really explanations. Actually, they are metaphors and parables. They are not explanations. Okay? Why? Because when you deal with mystery, when you deal with something that it's bigger than us, sometimes myths, metaphors, and parables explain better than arguments, rational arguments. But these stories, these myths, these parables help us to, work our way around the issue of evil and suffering. At least they acknowledge its existence and its impact on our lives. And again, what Christianity does, what the God of the Old Testament first and of Jesus Christ does, is, I can't explain suffering to you, I can't explain evil to you, but what I do is that I take it on myself. I share the pain with you. I share the grief. I share I share with you the sense of abandonment from God with you. Okay, so in a sense we can trust. It is as if you have the doctor that says to you, you have an illness, a very grave illness, okay? And the doctor says to you, listen, I don't know what you have. Medicine has not progressed enough for me to understand what you have, but I'll be with you all the way, okay? I'll be with you and I'll try to help you as much as I can. Even if the doctor can't explain, I still will trust him because of his compassion, because of his interest, because obviously God does more than that, because if we have to follow the image of the doctor, it is as if the doctor took the illness on himself, like decided, oh, I'm going to share your illness so that to show to you that really my compassion is not just words, but it's reality. Okay? So the Christian, the second quotation from page 105, we don't ask for a creator or a God who can explain himself. We ask for a friend in time of grief. And it is true that when we are in time of grief and of suffering, what helps us most is not, even in friendship, someone who comes to us and explains why this bad thing has happened to you, but offers you cheap like words of consolation. But it is someone who stays with you, sometimes even in silence, but stays with you and offers you like support, emotional support. Then there is a chapter on Jesus, which is also excellent. Number 4, Jesus is not simply a moral teacher, myth, or tragic hero. His story is unique. It claims that God entered ordinary history, suffered obscurely, and brought radical hope, not as fantasy, but in gritty human terms. So the story is about, says Spufford, God coming into what's ordinary and changing it. We always have the temptation of wanting a God who acts in extraordinary ways in history to solve problems. But the argument here, and I kind of agree with it, it is much more credible. A God who is much more credible is a God who, takes time and history seriously. And I want to say empowers us to be the agent of the change in history. This might sound a bit like, it's up to us. It's not just up to us, because God is part of this history, but certainly is a way of changing history that takes history seriously. Then there is a chapter on the church, with the acknowledgement that it is a mess, divided, sinful, compromise, but God works through it anyways. We trust God, not the church's performance, and remain committed to its mission because of Him, because of God. We don't, the quotation by Spufford, in fact, believe the church is precious because it is good, or does good, or because it may do good in future. We care about its behavior, but we don't believe that its muddled and sometimes awful record is the only truth about it. And it's been like my experience, as I told you several times, that yes, especially when you are a priest, obviously, you are a bit more into the inner workings. I lived in Rome, I told you, very close to the Vatican for 5 years. So, you get in a position where you see a lot of what is wrong about the church. And yet, my experience especially of preaching, and especially to nuns and sisters all over the world, has shown to me the unique power Christianity has of bringing about change and taking care of those nobody wants to care about. And I keep reading, there is this English historian called Tom Holland, who has written at least 2 or 3 books now about the history of Christianity. Now I'm reading his book on the history of Christianity in the Middle Ages. And it's coming from someone who is agnostic. It's an acknowledgement that Christianity, with all its flaws, has truly impacted Western history and changed it for the better. Okay, sometimes it's, 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, but slowly Christianity has had a positive influence on the growth of civility, at least in the Western hemisphere, where it has had power, not just in the Western hemisphere, of course, now, but much more broadly. And this, the issue of the church raises the issue of power, and sometimes the idea that, the church would solve all its problems by not having any power, okay? But the argument of, which is right, Spufford's argument is that, the moment you are in an institution, or the moment you have 2 or 3 more people who believe the same thing in society, they have power, they wield power. And if these 2 or 3 become 200 millions, or how many, 1 billion or 2 billions like today, of course you're going to have power. So the issue is not having power, but what you do with that power. And God knows if the church and Christianity has misused and abused power over its history, and yet there is a seed of criticism of power which is inside, in the DNA of Christianity. You cannot be a Christian and enjoy power without ever being challenged by your own faith about what you do with that power. So I think this is also a realistic and very insightful way of looking at this problem. Now, the last 3 points, I'll let you read them because they are the object of today's talk. I will summarize those pretty quickly because I'd like to leave at least more time to questions or conversations today, because we are closing with this book, so probably you might have points you want to raise. But this is today the argument of the last section of the book is basically what happens when you become a Christian, okay? Nowadays, most of the time, let's say in the past, you would be baptized as a Christian. The society would be broadly Christian in the sense that most people would go to church on Sunday. So it would be part of your social, ordinary way of living. So probably people were never really challenged to reflect on why they should do what they did. But nowadays, at least what we see here at St. Thomas, especially with the Pilgrim's Course, is that, a lot of the new people who come to St. Thomas are people who come to faith in adult age or have been baptized as children but never lived out that faith. And then at one point, they have an experience of conversion or interest or curiosity. And I have to say that, one of the questions I have is at present is how a lot of people, like last year we had 90 people registered for the Pilgrim's class. Every year we have probably, 30 new receptions in the church, confirmations and baptisms. And then what happens is that, these 30 people, like the numbers decrease, over time in terms of, and only probably a third, 10 people remain, become stably part of the community. And so why? Because there is this initial enthusiasm, but like all relationships, that's the main comparison used by Spufford here. It happens in the life of faith, the same thing that happens in all main relationships, which is, over time, past the initial rapture, the ordinariness of it can make it more challenging. So the first number one, so if you go at the beginning of your handout, number one quotation. So early on, says Spufford, I compared beginning to believe to falling in love, and the way that faith settles down in a life is also very like the way the first dizzy, intense phase of attraction settles, if it does, into a relationship. Rapture develops into routine, a process which keeps its customary doubleness where religion is concerned. It's both loss and gain together, with excitement dwindling and trust growing. Like all human ties, it constricts at the same time as it supports, ruling out other choices for the very act of being a choice. And so, as with any commitment, there are times when you notice the limit on your theoretical freedom more than you feel what the attachment is giving you. And then it tends to be habit or the awareness of a promise given that keeps you trying. Okay? So, as Christians, at least if we try to live our Christian life coherently, there are things that, tend to be more complicated. It would be so much easier if you are an investment banker not to be a Christian, right? Although I do believe that there is an ethical way of investing. And or an ethical way of being a politician. Oh my God. Or an ethical way. There's, I don't think there is any job that is intrinsically, that is going to lead you to, or you can, any activity you can perform only by cheating or only by being bad, etc. Any job can be done badly or can be done well, depending on your conscience, depending on you wanting to do good. But it is true that Christianity will set limits about what we can do, what we can't do. We can never harm other people. We can never cheat on other people. We can never use other people as means for our own ends. And more than that, Christianity also wants us to care for other people, especially those in need, not out of guilt, but just because we realize that we are all, sisters and brothers. We are all responsible for each other, etc., etc. So the limits, the more you live Christianity, the more these things. But these things should be we should want to do them not out of obligation of guilt. If our Christianity is authentic, we want to do them. We desire to do them. It becomes like a need. And we find joy in doing them. It's out of love. And when it says love, when we say love is, you might not love directly the person because, you don't know the person you are helping, but you love loving, as Augustine says. You love the fact that that loving is a good way of being, is what really brings you fulfillment and happiness, okay? So Spufford says, yes, it brings limitations, and sometimes you see, in terms of the faith, the life of faith and life of Christianity, more the way it constrains you than the ways in which it expands your life and gives you a sense of fulfillment and a sense of meaning that others' life choices don't give you. If I can share something personal, for me, I remember I had a conversion experience when I was 16, and I was very, very troubled by the issue of evil and suffering. I remember, writing and reading a lot about this at the time, and when I came to believe in God. I'd been baptized, etc. But I was not. It was more a faith of tradition than a faith as a felt adherence to God. But when I had that experience at 16, I remember that having a period of months of I was walking on a cloud. It was like, and what was incredible was the fact that I had a sense of meaning, and the idea, the sense, the feeling that there was a God and the love acting in history was something that really, like, I remember, the dizzy, how does he say it? The dizzy expression, the dizzy intense phase of attraction. I did feel that. But it is also true that, over the years, this feeling, kind of wanes, and it becomes more something of a sustained trust in God. So Spufford really tries to describe that experience and has a word to say about the importance of repetition. There are forms of Christianity, especially the charismatic one, that are very much against formulas and prayers, like we have here St. Thomas, and they want spontaneous prayer all the time. I don't know if you have ever been in those communities. I have, for a number of years, been very close. I've never been a charismatic, but I was very close to charismatic Christian communities. And however spontaneous you want to be, you are spontaneous in a very, very precise way. And it's formulaic in its kind of pretended spontaneity. So it just is part of the way things are, that if you do something, every week or several times a week for the whole year, for the whole of your life, you are going to repeat yourself. But what if repetition was not the enemy of spontaneity? So that's the point number 2. You discover, it says, as you go deeper into your faith, that repetition itself, curiously, is not the enemy of spontaneity, but maybe even its enabler. Saying the same prayers again and again, pacing your body again and again through the set movements of faith, somehow helps keep the door ajar through which he may come. Okay? So, certainly the form of Christianity that you find in St. Thomas is one that relies heavily on repetition. Always the same Bible, the same prayers, the same Psalms. And I was a Benedictine monk. We did this every day, 7 times a day. So it was even more, repetition was even greater. But it is true that, it's a repetition that shapes you. And when you go back to the same things, they are never the same because, the same Psalms or the same verses of Scripture, because over time, their meaning expands. Their meaning expands. So they speak to you in ways that they didn't in the past. Is the same thing when you love a poem. The more you go back to that poem, the more that poem is going to speak to you. Or a novel that is really a good novel is a novel you reread once, twice, sometimes 3 times. And each time you read it again, you find new layers, new meanings, and it speaks to you in new ways. Some people told me, I did a homily on The Little Prince of Saint-Exupéry a few months ago, and people said to me that they had read it again, they had not read it since their childhood, read it again after the homily, and they found, so much more that they did when they were children, obviously. So I'll let you read the rest of the handout, and I hope you'll be encouraged to read the chapter and possibly the rest of the book. It says something about politics. I don't want to get into that. Today, even talking about politics is dangerous, so I better not wade into that. But what is what remains to me of this book certainly is a sense that the way of reviving or rekindling our Christian faith really goes through taking seriously, the invitations to love and to commit and to discover the joy, and also to own the pain and the suffering in this companionship, covenant relationship with God. And that what keeps you anchored in Christian faith increasingly is really the sense that God is there present with you wherever you go through, even if sometimes it might not feel like extraordinary, but that's precisely the point, is that God in Christ has come to inhabit the ordinary of our lives.